as I said in the introduction that we all have, I'm very much influenced by literature in general. So the words and literature in itself, it just brings images to me, and sometimes more images than something than a painting or a photograph or something like that. So I think with me, it's just something is in the text that that breeds images, and connections. And so I relate more with words and with literature in general. So from going from this to philosophy is just one, in a way, one tiny step. If I like to read poetry, for example, and the kind of condensation that poetry has is quite interesting, and it's again it's in antithesis with philosophy, because philosophy tends to kind of go on and on and on,
Yeah, no, I guess that's real, because I could say the same. I think I agree. I think it definitely is just like a step away from art, or like I think it is the same thing as art actually, or it should be at least. And so I think that's like definitely where I'm coming from that place. I really like this idea of poetry as condensation, and I've been really into like I just started reading or reading more like concrete poetry in the way that they use like the page. Yeah, so we also had Franco Bifo. You know who Franco Bifo is? He's I didn't know until I read in class, but he is like a theorist. And we were asking a question about like, in response to something he wrote, and his answer was that poetry was like going to save the world, or like it was computing. It was like, what is computing? And computing is like moving in this one way, and like we don't have to do that. Like poetry is like the opposite of that, or like when computing ends, like we move into poetry. So when we stop going like, this button does this and this button does that, and we start like, like messing with everything, then that's poetry. And that is like, the thing that we will get to eventually, or the it's where we should go next, which is interesting. Yeah. I'm into this idea of exhaustion in terms of like thoughts. And I know you're really into like failure too, I remember that. Yeah, and I'm really into that. I was really excited that we got here together, because also very into this idea of like exhaustion, and also like that piece I showed you earlier has like the Symbionese Liberation Army, which is like a field movement, and I love field movements. Like I can't get it. Like I think that there's so much that like poetic like material or like ideas, and like all these great ideas that are just like overlooked, like relating back to like that High Project. So yeah, like the phoenix from the ashes kind of thing.
Right. Are you using, let's say, or are you kind of engaging or throwing yourself in this kind of space of exhaustion when you perform, for example?
For me, exhaustion, like it came from a place of this idea of like normalization, and then like once, what's on the margins of that, or the peripherals of normalization. And I think that's where exhaustion comes into play. Like once we get tired of looking at one thing, or once we're like bored, or like we are zoned out, or in that place where we don't see it, then we like start, like I think our human nature like wants to seek out different things or new things and get like, novelty, or like a new experience, or a new read. And I think that's where it is for me in terms of exhaustion. Yeah. Even like, yeah, definitely. So I guess it's a time conversation still. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so too. I actually am interested in using this kind of the exhaustion as a technique in a way, or approach, or whatever as you want to call it. It's almost like I become more let's say confident and grounded when I'm more tired, which so maybe it's not difficult to probably explain why. I guess it's the fact that you just don't you don't let yourself fall prey so much to the tension, you know, that other
Yeah.
people are looking at you and something like that.
Yeah, you become like more present. Is that it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's something like that, you know. Yeah, it really happens. Yeah, you know, it's you have control of the body to a, but but at the same time you don't really have so much, because the inertia, you know, and so the repetition and it takes a toll. But that's actually interesting if you instrument that creatively, you know. It can be sophisticated in the end. This is what I probably want to say, you know, that it doesn't have to be damaging physically if you know, even if you notice that the artist is tired, or it's just kind of running low on batteries, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I love that.
Yeah,
Especially like what you were saying about like when you perform more, like you like know the steps and everything. This
yeah,
is what I'm kind of interpreting this as, is like, you know, the steps, or like, you know what you're going to do. So you're
yeah,
like so much more focused, or like you allow yourself like a little bit more like variation.
yeah, yeah,
When we get to that place where we're more controlled, like we're super controlled, but also like that allows us to be looser.
yeah,
Have
yeah.
you,
And I guess it also allows the public and and the viewer to see to access differently.
well, just this idea of redefining things also is really interesting, like
Mhm.
exhaustion or like Alzheimer's, or like in that case,
Yeah,
you know, like, yeah, and also returning, like, I love that, like, you know, she couldn't remember things and would like go back and probably found out like, or like was able to like articulate it and like, or like expand on that in like such a different way. Um, yeah, also language. I don't know, it's just making me think about language when you talk about
mhm.
that. Well, I mean, obviously, but also just like in a broader sense, you know, in terms of like language leading to, or like language, like I was listening to like something about like smell and COVID, and how like their tests, like they were asking people, like they were describing certain, they asked people that lost their sense of smell to describe, like they got it back, but it was like messed up. And so they were asking them to describe certain foods using language that only people that had sense of smell had defined the food as, or what they thought it would be,
Yeah,
as opposed to like what their actual experience was. And
yeah,
then they did that, and there was like a whole, like it was a completely different experience,
yeah.
and like completely different word choice.
Hmm.
I don't know, it makes me think about that. But also, and tell me this might be like, I don't think so, because I've seen your work, but bondage, it reminds me of bondage a little bit too, you know, like in terms of that like bond, or like bondage, or like, you know, being bound, making you more present or aware. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how you associated bondage with the idea of being bound,
Hmm.
so restricted in a way, unable to kind of grasp reality and see what. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I never thought of it like that.
Yeah, I think praxis is super important. It's what makes things like important to me. Actually, it makes me want to pay attention to things, you know, like I think
Mhm.
that's why I'm drawn to pop culture, or like things like that, you know, like also bondage is like a kind of trendy right now. You know, like
Yeah, it
it's
is.
weird, but it's
Yeah,
very
I guess so.
trendy.
Yeah.
I think that says a lot about human desire as well. But I don't know, I think like those things are very important, you know, and they tell us a lot about desire. Yeah.
Yeah.